Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I'm very, very happy and pretty excited to be here with you today. As many of you know, this is a place in this podcast and YouTube channel where we talk about techniques, we talk about philosophies and ideas, but most importantly, we talk about practices that you can put into use in your daily moment-to-moment experience to bring a level of well-being, to bring a level of equanimity, to bring a level of homeostasis, the absence of stress, and ultimately to bring a sense of happiness, right? And one of the things that is commonly talked about in this work is that people who have practiced mindfulness and compassion practices, which are the practices we talk about here, people who have done this in their lives, they find themselves, and this is the term you hear all the time, happy for no reason. Right? It's not that we're happy because, we practice mindfulness and everything on the outside of our lives suddenly snaps into place and everything goes our way. I can assure you that does not happen as a result of mindfulness practices. But what does happen is that we realize in the awareness that we cultivate through these practices that the happiness isn't out there, right? It never was. Even though we thought it was, even though we believed with everything we had that it was about, everything in my life being in a good place, that's where I can be happy. But the truth is that happiness is a purely internal, personal, individual, subjective experience. And we cultivate this happiness, we cultivate this well-being. And again, happiness is not a state that we try to attain, but it's something that we return to. Right? And we can do this through the practices that cultivate, non-judging awareness of our moment-to-moment experience, which comes with an equanimity, with the ability to approach, all circumstances with the same attention and the same acceptance and the same, allowing ourselves to let go of expectations and outcomes and attachment to ideas, right? And in that is where our happiness is. In that ability to accept and to let go and to experience equanimity and to experience, allowing for, kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy to arise. That's where happiness is. And it's for no reason at all. It's not because something happened. It's the thing that is the background of everything that is happening. Right? So in my personal experience, after now practicing this work for nearly 10 years, yes, I go through difficult times. I mean, as I've been very open with all of you here about, the work I've been doing in the last year over of my trauma and understanding my trauma. And to understand your trauma means that you have to be with your trauma. You have to explore your trauma. You have to step into it. And let me tell you, folks, there are many moments in which I do this that I feel shaken. I feel very, very unhappy, right? I feel very much, no happiness. But the difference is that I don't carry that unhappiness into, my family and into the next day and the day after that and the day after that and the day after that. That's the point of happiness being this state of sort of a baseline, right? That's what these practices allow us, that it allows me to feel with ultra sensitivity and full feeling the trauma and the difficulty and the crying and the just the resentment and the grief that I feel from this, to feel it fully, not avoid it, but instead step into it, experience it for all it's got. And then at some point, sometimes it's a few minutes, sometimes it's a couple of days, but at some point you come back to this place of happiness. And the most beautiful thing about this is that this level of happiness, this baseline of happiness, is not a fixed point. It is movable. And it moves with these practices. It moves in a high, a beneficial direction with the practices, and it moves in a detrimental direction in the absence of these practices. Right. So today, as I think I've I think I've mentioned to you all a number of times that I don't, it's weird. I kind of live in these two separate worlds, right? I live the world of Art Burns, the coach, the mindfulness coach, the guy who helps people overcome the impact of stress and address the root of that stress, which oftentimes gets into things like trauma and childhood, issues and stuff like that, right? I'm that guy. He does a podcast almost every day. He does TikTok videos here and there, tries to do them every day, but is not that successful with it. Has this wonderful following. He does a guided meditation on Wednesday evenings, and he does all this great stuff, right? This guy, Art, right? Who's Art Burns, the coach, right? But then it's almost like I have this other Art Burns, right? Which is, the guy that all the people know me from before. They know me as the person who owned a bagel shop, or they know me as the person who used to be in the advertising business, right? They know me as the parent. They know me as the guy who drives the Toyota truck, whatever it is, right? And we all have this, right? We all have these different sort of roles that we play in our lives, right? And seldom do they come together. But last night was a moment in which these worlds did come together. I'm not using the word colliding because I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just something I don't necessarily promote. But last night, a dear old friend of mine, someone who's known me for beyond, before I started doing this work, and she's certainly seen me in moments of great unmindfulness and great unhappiness. But on Facebook last night, this person posted something about mental health. And I'm going to tell you what that is in a second. But first, I replied to something. I don't remember what the reply was, but then she said, "Hey, don't you have a podcast?" Right? Now, again, this is somebody who exists like outside this sort of realm of my professional life, right? And in the past, I might have been like, "Nope, I don't do a podcast. I don't know what you're talking about. You must have me confused with someone else. See ya." To literally try to hide my podcast from people who know me, right? And this deals with what we call imposter syndrome, and there's a lot of things that I understand about this, but functionally, this is where it's at, and it's really very funny to kind of experience this. But last night I was like, yes, I do, and here's the link. Right. So anyway, the post that she had made, and I want to just, she then replied to me that she'll be following. So if you're listening, you know who you are, and you're very welcome to be part of this community. And I'm really happy to have you among some really amazing people in this community. And yeah, welcome. So anyway, the post that started all this last night on Facebook was when this person said, mental health help in this country is a joke. And she's talking about America being this country. And again, I don't remember what I replied, but I certainly replied in the affirmative on some level, right? Or maybe I didn't even. Maybe I just reacted and gave like the care reacting. That's the one that I either do a heart or a care. It's pretty much nothing in between, which means that I'm being pushed down by the algorithm, by the way. There's recently came out that the algorithm, gives much more weight and many more points to elevate a post based on the angry emoji versus the love emoji. And that tells you all you need to know. Right. And that does get into what my friend was saying last night, that mental health help in this country is a joke. Right. Now, first of all, I want to be very, very clear. OK, when I say that I agree with that statement, what I'm really saying is that access to mental health help in this country is a joke. The industry, the for-profit nature of mental health help in this country is a joke. By no means would I ever say that, because I'll never believe it, right? That the individuals who are working in mental health to provide help, they are not a joke. Okay, from the coaches who are not licensed or regulated by the state, right? To the social workers, to the crisis managers, to the psychologists, to the neuroscientists, to the psychiatrists. all of these people are doing this work because they care. I mean, not all, of course. There's always going to be, a certain portion of people who are not, do not have the purest intentions, right? But by and large, the people, at least the people who I have known, who are in these fields, they are not a joke. They are in this field because of the passion, and quite frequently, it's at the suffering of their financial well being that they do this work. These people are not highly paid people, which is also a joke, right? So that part of it is a joke too, that these people are not paid, just like teachers are not paid as high as bankers. That is a joke, right? Maybe not. They shouldn't be paid as high as bankers, but bankers shouldn't be paid as high as bankers either. But anyway, so I wanted to talk about this a little bit, and I'm going to actually unveil my new glasses. And these, again, they're going to look much more crooked on this camera than they actually are. But anyway, just want to make sure I hit some of these notes here. Because like one of the things that the first thing that we need to understand when we talk about mental health, or access to mental health assistance in this country, right, is how much living in this country causes mental health issues. Right. There's this whole, hustle culture and this whole, even like the law of attraction kind of stuff that you get into, which makes people believe that, if you work hard enough and you do the right things and you do whatever it is, that you'll somehow become this success in this country. Right. And to be sure, there is not a limitation on that necessarily. Right. If you have the resources, yes, you can certainly achieve things in this society, this sort of model of capitalism that we have. Yes. But at the same time, it's important to recognize how much damage this system of capitalism does on those who do not have those resources. Right? And it's specifically what I mean by this, and one example really, is that, when you're driving in your car, like here in Denver, I'll tell you, my first statement was going to be that when you're driving in your car or you're walking down the street and you see people who are unhoused and living on the street, and they're clearly, most of the people who are unhoused, experience mental health issues. Right, very severe mental health issues, and that's directly tied to why they can't keep a job, why they can't pay their bills, why they wound up without a house. Right. So even seeing that suffering causes you to suffer. Right, because we are all empathic people, and it's built into our biology to be empathic. And so when we see people suffering this way, when we see people who are hungry, when we see people who are imprisoned unfairly, right, and we see the financial motive behind all of this, it makes us suffer. Right. And so right off the bat, right, mental health, help in this country is in a disproportionate need from the rest of the world. A few years ago, I was lucky enough to have coached someone who lived in Norway. And he is now a coach himself. He's a great guy. And if you're listening out there, brother, I miss you and I love you. I remember first, in like our first or second conversation, I was like fascinated about what life in Norway is like, and one of the things he said, he made a point of saying, is that we don't have people living on the streets in our country. I was like, wait, what? He says, yeah, I mean, we're a wealthy country and we take care of each other. And there is none of that. And I think the context in which that came up was his personal mindfulness practice, because he's like, I don't feel like I need it that much in this society. He says, when I go live in London, which he splits his time, when I'm in London, I need it. I need to go to yoga. I need to do meditation every day. I need all that. But when I'm in Norway, it doesn't feel like I need it. Because again, there is no suffering that he is seeing on a daily basis. Now, of course, that's not the only reason why we do things like meditation and yoga and all these practices, but it certainly is a big one, right? It's the reduction of suffering. That's what we're looking for here, right? That's essentially the core of why we do anything we do in our lives, is to reduce our own suffering and perhaps reduce the suffering of others. But again, the point is that when we're looking at this, it in and of itself is making us need the mental health help that we can't get access to. And another thing that's really important to remember or to recognize, in other countries, in basically every other developed country, if you have a problem, whether it's mental health, physical health, whatever kind of health, dental, vision health, whatever it is, you just go to the doctor and you get it taken care of. You do not need a copay. You do not need an insurance plan. You do not need all of these things in most of these countries on some level or other, right? America is really the only one who has this for-profit healthcare system. And that goes into the mental health care system as well. I mean, it's just as much for-profit as any other HMO that you can imagine. And that's why, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk talks about in the book, The Body Keeps the Score, right, which is all about trauma. And Dr. van der Kolk was one of a couple of hundred different psychologists and clinical psychologists who wrote to the DSM people, the people who run the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, begging for them to put in, or petitioning for them to put in, complex PTSD into the latest manual, and they refused. And so anyway, so there's this whole, area of mental health that's not even being considered, right? Which is, complex CPTSD is what we get when we, live for years of, emotional neglect or emotional abuse. It doesn't have to be physical. It doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to be, any specific thing, but just, living in a family that is damaged is going to create the mental health issues that we're going to carry for the rest of our lives. And of course, I'm going to do another podcast on this soon, but in my experience with my own trauma and in my own marriage and most of my own friendships, the idea is that, traumatized people can only wind up with other traumatized people, because to a non-traumatized person, the traumatized person just doesn't have their stuff together. It's just not a good partner. And so it's only when we meet someone who has sort of really what it is, we meet somebody who, irritates our trauma, which is the messed up thing that we do. But that's what's going on here. So what happens then is that each new generation just creates a new generation of trauma. And it keeps going and going and going, right? Like, so I can see aspects of my grandparents that they needed mental health help that they didn't get. And look at me, right? Lo and behold, I have the same issues. And so this is a very important, sort of aspect of the understanding that the even addressing the need for mental health. Right. But again, getting back to Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, is the fact that, what he talks about in that book, the Body Keeps the Score, which is, again, all about trauma and complex trauma. Is really, really intense book. Really, really very, very informative book. Highly recommended. BESSELVANDERKOLK is how you spell the author's name. Okay. And the book's name, again, is The Body Keeps the Score. Now, the reason I reference this, and this is like what my wife would call a long walk for a ham sandwich here, is that what he mentions in this book, and he's pretty critical of the mental health help system that we have, which is why, especially the person who made that Facebook post last night, you probably will very much enjoy this book, right? But what he says is that because of our for-profit healthcare system, and because it's driven by the for-profit insurance industry, right? At this point, talk therapy is not even a thing anymore. Unless you have the money to pay for it out of your pocket, it's really not a thing. At least, again, the way that he describes it. Now, I could be wrong about that. I haven't tried to get into it, and that's something else I'm going to talk about, right? But what he talks about is that, whether talk therapy is completely gone or limited or whatever. I mean, I remember 20, 30 years ago, that's what you did. You went to a therapist for a couple of years, every week, just talking and talking and talking. And in those conversations, you come to the answers, you come to the understandings that allows you to live well, right? To allows you to reduce your suffering. But now, according to Dr. Vanderkolk, what's happening now is that the insurance companies, they would much rather just give you, say, 6 months of talk therapy, which is really just the opportunity for your doctor to give you a diagnosis, which then he or she is going to prescribe a medication, right? And so even on that level, even when you are able to access the mental health help, a lot of times it's just about, giving you a medicine that will allow you to function within this, capitalist hellscape, right? And the problem is that the medications are not for everyone. And the other problem is that the medications carry side effects, no matter how you slice it and dice it. I have one person I know who suffers from bipolar disorder, diagnosis bipolar, and takes medication. The medication makes him feel like he's not connected to himself. He feels like he's not him, and he can't handle it. You can't blame somebody for that, right? Another person I know who also has bipolar, who takes the medication, she has a couple of other issues, and she takes a certain medication that negatively impacts her ability to remember things. Her short-term memory is impacted. It's a known side effect to the medication. Her job, she is in the medical health industry as a physician's assistant, requires memory. I mean, if she forgets something, someone could die. So that's a non-negotiable thing for her. So she has actually reduced her medication with her psychiatrist, which is a really beautiful, very encouraging story, right? That she came to me about a year ago. We had been working together for a while, and she had just got a new job and felt like, wow, I'm really worried about this memory thing with my medication, and I want to try to reduce my medication, not get rid of it, but reduce the dosage to whatever point, maybe get rid of it, who knows? And I said to her, I was like, okay, I'm willing to help you with this, but you need to agree. You need to commit to doing the meditation practices, because it's just like taking medication, right? And I'm going to tell you in a second what Dan Siegel talks about with that. But she then addressed it with her psychologist, and she was our psychiatrist rather. She was convinced 100% that he was going to say no. But because she presented it in the context of, this is what I'm also doing, he was like, I applaud it. Let's try it. And to my knowledge, she's still on a very, very low dose, like even like the lowest she could possibly do kind of thing. And she's maintained, she's actually starting to thrive. And it should be noted that this person doesn't do the sit down 20 minutes of meditation every day. She does a form of meditation that I've taught her, and this is a practice for all of you, right? That a few times a day, like 4 or 5 times a day, you pause and check in with yourself. You check in with your physical sensations. Then you check in with what emotions are you experiencing right now. And then you check in with, what are my thoughts doing right now? Are my thoughts barreling through my mind right now like a freight train? Or are they gentle and smooth like the undulating sea, right? Or are they anywhere in between? And by doing this a few times a day, what you do is you train your body to check in with yourself. And the more you're checking in with yourself, that is your ability to regulate whatever is going on, right? And so that's a very simple practice. I call it the pause. It's super simple. And you can do that starting today. Set a timer on your phone 5 times a day. And I promise you, and I'm telling you that this person, in addition to some compassion practices, this was all she did. And she's literally reduced her medication for bipolar disorder. It's impressive, okay? And so that's all it requires. And the pause doesn't have to take more than like 10 seconds. It might take as much as like 3 or 4 minutes if you really take time with it, if you have the time to spend with it. but it can be like a 10 to 30 second kind of thing. Boom, boom, out. But you do it over and over and over, and then it becomes something your body is doing on its own, just like breathing, just like eating. Eating is probably more accurate analogy, right? When you're hungry, you just grab something to eat it. You don't think about eating. You don't. I mean, sure, maybe you got to prepare something or something like that, but while you're consuming it, it's not like, oh, I'm thinking about the muscles in my jaw moving and masticating the food and how it's breaking down and the nutrients are coming out of it. No, we're just stick the vegetable in our mouth or whatever it is, right? So the pause becomes that way too. It just becomes like, oh, I'm feeling agitated. Wait, let me check in. What is this? Oh, okay, yeah, that's what's going on. And that's what happens. It's about the awareness. So anyway, getting back to our topic of the mental health help in this country being a joke, again, these even the sort of mission of our mental health industry right now is about medication. But that in and of itself has an inherent flaw. And again, getting back to Dan Siegel, you hear me talk about Dan Siegel a lot. He's a pioneer in interpersonal neurobiology. He's a psychologist. He's a psychiatrist. He's an MD. He's a pediatrician. Truly a renaissance man, this guy is. He's a best-selling author of 10 or 12 books or something like that. I don't know that that's how many it is. I'm just giving him credit. It might be 4 or 5. Amazing books, though. Gotta read them. But anyway, he talks in the class that I took with him and in several other talks that I've heard him give. He says, I like to trade in the C for the T. From medication to meditation. And that's a neurobiologist, psychiatrist who actually prescribes meds to people all the time. And that's the point that he makes. It's not like all or nothing. For some people, medication is very necessary for them to be able to balance and regulate themselves enough to function in their moment-to-moment experience. But meditation does very similar things. And for a lot of people, meditation alone is enough. For others, a combination of medication and meditation with the understanding that we're eventually going to wean ourselves off of the crutch of the medication, perhaps. Now, with some people, that's not possible. Some people who has, schizophrenia, they need to take antipsychotic medication or else they literally cannot function in this world. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's another part of mindfulness, is that we learn to see things without the judgment. We learn to see the non-dualistic complexity and nuance of the reality of this world. And that for some people, medication is the only answer. For other people, medication is never the answer. For some people, it's a hybrid, right? And so that's another important thing. But the reason I bring this up is because, what we're doing when we practice, when we practice our meditation, what we're doing ultimately is we're by training attention, right, which is all meditation is. It's paying attention to something, and when your mind wanders off, you bring it back. That's all meditation is. And by doing that over and over and over, just like the pause, it becomes a skill. Right? There's a little part of our brain that benefits, that becomes stronger in that process of the mind wandering, bring it back, right? And essentially one of the things that's happening when we do that, when we train our attention, is we're cultivating and promoting an integration within our brain, right? Your brain is not just this big singular monolithic thing. It's this object that weighs a few pounds, is about this big and sits inside this skull, but it's made up of all these different regions that do very, very specific things. And when we experience pathology, when we experience anxiety or depression or stress or, the conditions of ADHD and bipolar disorder and all this stuff, these are all inherently examples of disintegration of these parts of our brain. For instance, ADHD or ADD is there's a non-linkage because of a developmental thing that happened with the frontal cortex, the part of your brain that gets stuff done is really hard it doesn't exist on the same level as someone who doesn't have ADHD. But again, it's a process of integration, or it's a form of disintegration, which can be helped by integration. Now, I'm not saying that you just do your meditation, you'll never have any symptoms of ADHD again. It's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying that doing the meditation is going to promote the integration that ultimately is the solution to ADHD. Right. So along with medications, along with other lifestyle changes, it is very possible for people, and I know people who do this, they live with it and they're able to function with it. It doesn't have to be a disabling kind of thing. And again, really the notion is that all pathologies are indicative of some level of disintegration, and B, all forms of meditation, whether it's formal meditation, informal meditation with just like paying attention to brushing your teeth, or the semi-formal meditation of a pause that I just explained to you, these are all cultivating and promoting levels of integration. So no matter what, you're moving in the right direction. Is it going to be exclusively enough or not? That's hard to say. That's individual. That's subjective. But certainly, and this also applies, of course, to people who do not have diagnosed, issues, right? that or conditions, I should say. That even people with undiagnosed, even people who don't have pathologies are going to benefit from this same integration. Okay. So it's good, full stop. It's beneficial, full stop. And as you all know, like for me, access to mental health help is a problem for me. There's a financial boundary, there's a time boundary that I homeschool 2 kids and I work full time to keep myself afloat again in this capitalist hellscape that we live in. So there's many, many ways in which I do not have that access. Sure, if I really needed it, I could get it, right? I could borrow money. I could, find a way to do it for sure. And that kind of is the root of what I'm talking about here, right? That I have, really, I've overcome a lot of anxiety. I've overcome a lot of depression. I've overcome a lot of stress, chronic damaging stress that was manifest in anger that used to destroy everything around me. And now I'm at the point where I'm resolving my trauma, and I'm doing it all without mental health help. Okay, now that's not to say that if you have access to mental health help, you should go get it. Yes, you should. Absolutely 100%. Do not force yourself to do it on your own if you don't have to. I wish I didn't have to do it on my own. But the thing I want you to know is that on your own, if you do, really intentionally and purposefully do these practices, you can do this too on your own, or at least you can help yourself a great deal. Now, the other component, especially when it comes to trauma, it's mindfulness, which is it allows me to see it without judgment from the here and now, but then it's also self-compassion. Right? You must be able to practice some self-compassion, which is the ability to soothe yourself through times of crisis. Okay? So if you're able to, or if you're willing to practice both of these, to a large extent, you can heal yourself. You can bring yourself to a point where you don't need a therapist. You don't need that help that you're not able to get. And you might not need the medication either. Okay, but now listen, this is very, very important for you to understand that this is not me giving you medical advice. Okay, I am not a licensed or regulated professional to give you that advice. That is not what I'm doing. Okay, all I'm doing is telling you that from my perspective, it has been very helpful. All right. All right, everybody. I wish you well, and I will do my best to do another episode tomorrow. The weekends, as you know, the Saturday and Sunday days get a little bit hectic for me, but we'll see what we can pull off. All right. Well, thank you all for listening today. Thank you for watching, and welcome to all my new members, especially if you're here. That friend of mine from New York. It's great to see you in this community. All right, everybody. Wishing you well. I'll see you soon. Take care.